Mother Knows Death, starring Nicole and Jemmy and Maria QK.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mother Knows Death. This week's 6 shocking stories is shocking. So let's get started with the first one.
All right, so a mom and her 11-year-old daughter are in the kitchen and they hear a loud cry from the other room. So in that room, there was a 6-year-old playing with an 11-month-old baby, which I find kind of risky in general, right? Because 6-year-olds are just like kind of the devil most of the time.
Yeah, but I think when you're a mom and you have a little, you have 2 kids and you're home by yourself and you're in the kitchen trying to cook, the 6-year-old is old enough to kind of, hey, just look after your sibling while I'm here in the next room so I could cook dinner or something. So I totally like a totally normal scenario to me.
Yeah, so the mom goes in the room after hearing some crying and the baby's forehead is just bleeding profusely. And they're like, what the hell? So they rush to the hospital and they're just kind of confused what happened because it kind of looked like it was a gunshot wound, but there's no gun in the house. So, and they didn't hear a loud bang like that or anything. So, like, what could have possibly happened?
So looking at the wound, I'm going to try to describe it to you. It's kind of an indented wound that you would see when a bullet goes into the skull. It leaves its mark as it's going on its way through. And there's an indentation there. But the thing that you could tell that it's not a gunshot wound is because there's no area of abrasion or gunpowder or soot or anything surrounding the wound. And so what they did was they did an x-ray, was the first thing that they did, and they saw that the kid had an orbit fracture or broken bones around the eye and also had a contusion in the brain, which is a bruise basically on the brain. But what they saw was that there was an opaque foreign body on the x-ray. So they knew something penetrated his head. They just didn't know what.
So they get it out and it's a marble. And okay, children play with marbles, but how did it still get so deep in this kid's head, right? Turns out the weapon of choice was a slingshot.
Yeah, so kid playing with a slingshot, put a marble in it, shot it into this kid's forehead, and they're seriously lucky because that kid could have lost an eye and something far worse, which this is pretty bad, honestly, but it could have been a lot worse. So last summer we went to this farm type of amusement park near Lancaster, and they were selling those rubber band guns and slingshots and all this stuff. And I just was thinking about this story, how, it's an innocent thing that kids like to play with and stuff, but kids are dumb and they put stuff like rocks and everything like that, and it could just lead to serious injuries.
I think most children can weaponize almost any object.
Yeah.
Because
That's true. Did you see the mystery diagnosis that I did last night with the pencil granuloma? So it was this lady in her 70s that got stabbed with a pencil when she was 10 years old. And it ended up causing a foreign body reaction years later, 60 years later. And it caused a nodule that she got removed, and that's all it ended up being. And it also left a tattoo mark in her skin for 60 plus years. But the most interesting part of that is that when you read the comments on Instagram, there's hundreds of comments of people saying, that happened to me. I have a pencil tattoo, this and that. So it's just like a really common thing for kids to do dumb shit,
Yeah, like, do you ever have a baby just like take your glasses off your face and then smash them right in your face and you're like,
always.
How does this delicate object that I wear every day now injure me? But I would argue that we don't know how dangerous most objects are until a child has them in their hands.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I feel bad that this mom had to go through this, but at least everything ended up being all right for the most part. So that story is called Kid Weapons if you want to see some of the x-rays and pictures, because that was absolutely outrageous. This next one's called Splash Patty. So I think most of our grocery members can agree that this is one of the most horrific cases we have. So this 2-year-old girl, this is out of India. She's playing in a waterlogged paddy field. So that's like a field where rice is grown. I'm assuming because she was a toddler, she was, splashing around in water and everything, that her parents were like, just run around naked, as most people let their kids do and if they're running through a sprinkler or outside or anything. So she's just playing, minding her own business, and the parents look over and see that a leech is near her genitals. And what goes on from there?
So the parents see this leech and they go over and they try to grab it because they see where it's going. And the leech ended up going right up inside of her vagina, which is so outrageous, right? So the leech goes up there and the parents take the kid home and they're like, you know what? We're going to insert some salts and some herbs and try to lure this leech out, right? And that didn't work. So they finally brought her to a medical center, and the medical center stuck a bunch of instruments up there and tried to get it out. Then all of a sudden she started having abdominal pain, discomfort, and things like that. So they brought her to a hospital, and there they did an ultrasound and they saw that this leech was still alive inside of her body, but now it was not in the vagina anymore. It was in her abdominal cavity. So they did emergency surgery, and well, we'll say emergency surgery. It really wasn't until 22 hours after this thing crawled up there. And they finally found it inside of her abdominal cavity, sitting on her organs in a big clot and of blood sitting around it, and it was dead. And when they took it out, the thing was 10 centimeters long. It's so big.
Yeah, I mean, the pictures of this are crazy when you see, like, how tiny her body is versus just how large this thing is. And I don't think I really realized leeches were that large. I've always seen them in a really small scale. So these pictures are extra disturbing.
Well, they become engorged with blood, so they get bigger, like a tick would or something like that. And there's a couple different reasons why ticks are can be dangerous, because they not only suck and just physically suck the blood out of a person, but they also have enzymes in their saliva that cause our blood not to clot. So it just will keep bleeding and bleeding at the site. And especially in organs and everything like that. Now, this paper was written up as if this was the first time it's reported that a leech was able to perforate the uterus and get inside of the abdominal cavity. But I also have a theory that those doctors that were poking and prodding and trying to get it out of her perforated her uterus by accident, perhaps. So I'm not sure, and obviously I didn't look at the case, so I don't know. But regardless, this is a terrifying situation for a parent to go through, and especially this kid. Imagine what this little kid went through. So luckily they were able to give her blood transfusions, close up her uterus, and she survived.
If they didn't see the leech going in, would this have resulted in her life being saved? Would they have even known even if she was in pain and everything later, would they have known what to do, or the severity of it?
I guess it depends, because if the leech truly has the capacity to eat through the uterine wall and get into the abdomen, then they would have known, because she would have presented with these problems regardless. She would have had the abdominal distension and the disorientation and stuff like that. But if it just was staying inside the uterus, she still would have had problems, but she probably would have had bloody discharge, which would be unusual in a kid, you know what I mean? And then if they brought her to the hospital or the doctor and did a proper examination, they would have seen it within her uterus. So she would have presented with some symptoms at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about, kids get hurt and then sometimes people blow them off and they're like, you're fine. So I just don't know if they didn't see it immediately happen, if it would have been taken care of, or they would have been, they didn't bring her to the hospital right away, but they were actively trying in the way they knew to try to get it out. But
I'm going to go on a ledge and say that they probably made the situation worse than it had to be.
Yeah.
But regardless, you still have to think about this. This case was in India. There's some parts of India that are extremely poor and they don't have access to normal healthcare like you would think of. So for them to even go to a doctor may be hours away. And then when they do, it might cost so much money that they really don't want to do it unless it's like a life or death situation. You know what I mean? So you can't really say,
Yeah, for sure. All right. So this next one's called I Hear That Tastes Good. So A 30-year-old.
This is another outrageous story in the grocery room.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, most of these are completely outrageous, and the pictures that go along with them are just even wilder. So 30-year-old male is found dead in the woods one morning. So basically his body was naked. He was lying on the right side with his face touching the ground. He had cut and stab wounds. Both ears, his scrotum, and one of his toes were cut off, but I don't think they were present right away. So a single-edged blade was found close to the body, and no amputated body parts were found at the scene. So explain what this autopsy looks like after they find this guy.
So when they find him, he has obvious cuts all over his body. And like Maria said, he had all of these body parts amputated, but the body parts weren't close by. And he had one major mark across his neck that transected his trachea and also one of his major veins, his jugular vein in his neck. So what happened was, as his neck was bleeding, the blood was pouring into his trachea and went into his lungs, and that actually caused him to die from asphyxia. So he didn't die from the bleed. He died because the blood was pouring into his lungs, essentially. And that was seen on autopsy. But the craziest part of this story is when they opened his stomach to examine his stomach contents. What did they find in there, Maria?
His ear and his toe were in his stomach, which means that he ate them.
Yes. So after they did, and yes, let's repeat that his toe and his ear were in his stomach at autopsy. So you have to see the pictures of this because this case is outrageous too, but when they did some further investigation, found his family and everything like that, they found out that he had this extended history of suicidal ideations, suicidal attempts. He was diagnosed with a psychosis at some point, and he was medicated, wasn't medicated, so he was having problems for quite some time. He was only 30 years old, but he was hearing voices telling him to kill himself.
He had been abusing synthetic I can't ever say this word, cannabinoids for years too, so his parents were really worried about that. And then he had, this...
Which definitely didn't help his situation.
No, and then he just kind of had this spiral of mental health issues and all these other suicide attempts in the past, so...
My one question is that his scrotum was amputated, right?
Yeah.
Where was that?
I don't know.
I'd like to know because it wasn't found at the scene unless... I just can't even imagine because the ear and the toe were completely not digested even a little bit. Like that, it happened shortly before he died.
Could there even be the possibility, I mean, I'm sure they ruled this out, that somebody could have killed him, but before he died, they cut those parts off and then made him eat those two things?
No, just because of because of his history, the wounds appeared self-inflicted. There was no other trauma to his body. Like see, let's say when you get stabbed to death, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do if somebody comes up to you with a knife? The first thing you're going to do is like put your hands up and try to push them off of you, right? So people who get stabbed to death have marks on their hands that they're defensive wounds, they're called. They're incisional wounds from the knife that they're kind of blocking. And this guy didn't have any of that. He didn't look like he was in a struggle. He didn't look like he was trying to fight anyone off. They looked like, they look at the weapon and say, like, could you stab yourself with this? Yes. And then he had this extended history of this particular mental health issues. And we know he tried to kill himself several times. And he tried to stab himself. There's just like multiple things that make them go with that.
Yeah, I get that. I was just saying, like, I mean, obviously it's most likely a self-inflicted wounds and suicide, right? But I just thought there was like no mention at all if there was a possibility that anybody else could have been involved in this.
Yeah, I mean, just for those reasons, I would say no, just because when you do an autopsy on a person that was stabbed, most of them have a particular look of like, someone approached me, I wasn't expecting this, I tried to fight them off, it didn't work, I ended up getting stabbed, I ended up dying. Like that's the picture you could see at autopsy.
Yeah, definitely.
And you didn't see that in this case.
And we talk about cannibalism a lot too, but I don't think I've ever seen a case of somebody eating their own body parts.
Yeah, this particular case. Now, I've heard. I think I do have a couple cases in the grocery room of similar situations, but this is the first time that I've ever read that during the autopsy they opened an organ and found body parts that were not digested.
Yeah, because the pictures too, they're like swallowed whole.
Yeah,
and
it's insane.
And as you said earlier, they're not digested or anything. So it's like, I imagine being the medical examiner performing this.
No, I can't. I also, if this wasn't in a medical journal, like I wouldn't even believe this story. It's so outrageous. If you saw the pictures, you would think that they were like AI generated or something. It's insane.
Yeah.
Hey guys, this episode's brought to you by The Grocery Room. Today is the last day of our big sale, which is $20 for a whole entire year of gross. So you will get to see all of these articles that we talk about every week on 6 shocking stories, as well as thousands of other photos, videos, articles, and audio. So sign up today.
Yeah, so visit thegrossroom.com to sign up for $20 for a whole year of gross. We decided to extend the sale an additional day, so you have till the end of today, which is July 23rd, to sign up.
All right, so this next story is titled in the grocery room, Dragon Dick.
A woman went to visit her 26-year-old at his apartment. So as she approaches the door, she notices a little piece of a scarf like coming through the crack. So as she opens the door, she discovers that her son is dead on the floor and he has a ligature around his neck, which was made from a towel and a cotton scarf tied together.
Yeah, so he was found on face down, and he only had on a t-shirt and socks, so his whole butt was exposed, and he had fluid around his genitals that appeared to be semen. So what they did was they checked out the scene and they interviewed the mom and everything, and they found out that, so this is opposed to the other case, like this guy didn't have any mental health issues. He didn't have any history of suicidal ideations or attempts or anything like that. So they really wanted to find out what happened in this case. So they started looking around his apartment and they opened up his computer and they found some interesting pornography.
Yeah, so on his computer, there appeared to be like a page from Reddit open, which was an anime dragon with a 6-pack and an enormous penis. So it appeared that he was jerking off to this picture.
Yes, and he was performing. So when they did the autopsy, they found that he had died of asphyxia. I mean, you can't just say that obviously just because he's found with a ligature around the neck, but he had edema in his lungs and in his brain, and he had some congestion in his lungs as well, and he had petechial hemorrhages on some of his organs and things. And all of this, along with the ligature that made a mark around his neck, it was consistent with an asphyxial death. So when they look at, he definitely had an asphyxial death. And then when they look at all of those other things, like he didn't have the suicidal ideations and stuff, and that they found this weird fetish kind of porn at the scene, they determined that he died from autoerotic asphyxiation.
We had mentioned that before because the actor David Carradine had also died from that. So explain why people do that.
Well, they do it because it intensifies an orgasm. So it's just putting it out there. Like there's no safe way to do it, but lots of people do it. Didn't we talk about a story a couple weeks ago that teenagers said that like 50% of them partake in it or something?
Yeah, we had a story.
It was something outrageous.
Yeah, we had a story on the news episode that Gen Z is really into being choked or strangled when they're having sex. Like I think it was over 60% of them. And then we started getting into the David Carradine situation and all of that. So,
yeah, so there's no safe way to do it because you're basically closing off your carotid arteries to deprive your brain of oxygen so you have more of an intense orgasm. But people that partake in this, and I mean, lots of people do it and don't die, so it works sometimes, you know. They have like a safety in order to stop the choking, like while they're doing it. And in this case, this guy would use the door handle, and just opening the door handle would release the ligature off of his neck. But unfortunately, what happens when you close off your carotids is that you can pass out really, really fast. And that's what happened. So he didn't, which is even sadder, he didn't die automatically. If someone was there, they would have been able to save his life. But unfortunately, he was by himself. And another thing that's interesting is that when people are found in this situation dead, there's often other fetishes associated with this that are found at the scene, such as pornographic material, sometimes like weird kinky things like dragons with dicks and stuff, female like lingerie, ropes, bondage, things like that are found at the scene as well. And as far as I can remember, almost every single case that I've seen of this had some kind of thing like that. It usually was like the guy was wearing lingerie or something like that. And it is important to note that it's most common in the United States to die from this, but it does happen worldwide.
Is it common, if they've determined it's not a homicide, to include the type of pornography in the case? Because I don't know. I kind of feel bad for the mom, because it's like this picture of this like anime.
Because we're talking about this on 6 Shocking Stories right now.
We're talking about it, but we're talking about it because the picture of the porn was included in the case file, which kind of like what is the relevance? Like he would, I don't know. I just think it's weird. If they were trying to be like he was, you know, a child predator or something like that, I would understand why they were included. But like, if that's what he gets off to, like, it's not for me, but it's for some people. So I don't understand why it has to be in the case file.
I understand, because let's say they didn't take a picture and this whole case gets signed out, and then the mom starts her shit like, he was murdered, you guys didn't investigate it, blah 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 blah. Like, this happens all the time, by the way. Like, everybody thinks that their family member didn't kill themselves or accidentally, like they don't believe stuff like this. So let's say she just started like, you didn't investigate it, someone could have came to his apartment and murdered him and this and that. Like, what are they going to say? Like that, this like photo kind of builds their case. Like, no, this was, you know, he didn't have this history of suicidal ideations, and he also had this on his computer. Look, this is exactly what we found on his computer. I understand it should be in the case file for sure. I don't know, because this isn't from a case file. This is from a medical journal.
Well, that's even more inappropriate.
What? So, I don't know. Like, I think for us, it's just kind of like we're trying to teach, like, hey, people do this and people die from this. So, I don't mind seeing it. We don't know who the guy is. It's not like embarrassing his mom. You know what I mean?
Okay,
like,
after your explanation, I understand why the photo would be in like the police file, right? Or of what, or the incident report, whatever happened, right? But you're saying this is sourced from a medical journal, so therefore, why was that relevant? Like, you could just say imagery was found on the computer that was determined.
Yeah, they could have said that there was like some. Is there a name for like animal animation porn?
I'm sure
like
there's
anime porn or whatever the hell
it.
it's called. Yeah, like, yeah, they totally could have just said that. But I mean, I don't mind seeing it, and I'm interested to see what people are looking at jerking off.
No, I mean,
I don't know about you.
This picture is what made this case unique, right? Because as you're saying, autoerotic asphyxiation happens. It happens. It's not like super common, but it happens. But like, this picture in itself is like, it's so bizarre to me they would include this in a professional medical journal. Like, all you had to say was they found pornography on his computer and determined that was his cause of death.
Well, the best was, so I didn't even tell you this because it was after you left yesterday. I sent the picture to Gabe and I was like, you won't believe this. And I sent the picture to him and he's like, oh my God, are the kids looking at that on their phone? And I was like, no, they're not looking at that on their iPads. Like, this was from a medical case. It just was hilarious because it's just kind of like it's like such a funny, weird picture that you can't even really imagine that anyone would actually like get off on it, I guess, because it's a cartoon.
Well,
I don't know.
I guess it's one of those, like you were saying earlier, like if this wasn't in a medical journal, you almost wouldn't believe it because it just seems so. I mean, I know there's a group of people that get off on this type of stuff, but I'm saying like the fact that this picture exists in a professional setting, if you didn't see it in from a credible source, you almost just wouldn't believe how outrageous the details of it were.
No. It really gets you thinking. Like, that's why when I posted this article in the gross room, I added at the end, like, do you know anybody that has a story where they found something like super embarrassing from a person that they like you saw it and you wish you didn't see it, kind of a thing.
I'm sure.
I always like try to put a question at the end just to get people talking and stuff. And that one, I just posted this article like right before we started recording, so I don't know what anybody's writing, and I'm just curious about that today.
I'm sure like everybody in some capacity has something embarrassing on their phone. I don't know. I mean, not.
Well, I have that picture on my phone right now, so
yeah. Like, what if I was just going?
Somebody might come across it and be like, "Okay, Nicole, you're looking at this."
I mean, I also think of how many times, when you were redoing the kitchen and you were at like the kitchen showroom and you were trying to pull up your like Pinterest picture of what you wanted the counters to look like, and then they see like pictures of organs in your camera roll, and they're just like,
well, they shouldn't be standing so close to me looking at my phone.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't know. I think obviously in an investigation you have to look at everything, but definitely in real life you should not be looking over people's shoulders in their phones.
No.
All right, this next one's called Monster Inside Me. So a 17-year-old female had gone to the hospital complaining of abdominal distension and pain for 4 months. So, of course, they immediately give her a pregnancy test, which I don't know why it bothers me so much. Like, in 2020, I was having all my stomach pain, and as we know now, it was related to my gluten allergy. But immediately they were like, "Are you sure you're not pregnant?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sure I'm not pregnant, Carol. Thank you." But
well, I mean, to be fair, like that's the most common cause of. There's like this whole subset of the population that remember there was a TV show called "I Didn't Know I Was Pregnant."
Yeah.
There's like people that are just completely checked out and don't realize what's happening with their body. And like a woman of childbearing age that's like that will be the most common cause. There's other causes, but like, come on.
Yeah, I get that.
That's like they want to check anyway, because before they start exposing you to radiation or whatever, they want to know like if you're pregnant, because that they could hurt the fetus if they do something to you, give you certain drugs or whatever. So it's like the first thing they want to know.
Yeah, so an ultrasound was done. They determined that she had a mass. She was scheduled for surgery, and a large cyst was identified on her left ovary, which was 3 ounces and 4 inches. I feel like that's kind of huge for that.
It's huge, but it's not huge, because I've seen ovary cysts that are like 30 centimeters and 40 centimeters, like huge, bigger than, like 12 inches, 18 inches, 30, like huge. They take up your whole entire table. So it's big, but for an ovary cyst, it's kind of like, that's how big they are.
So what happens so this gets cut out and then it gets sent to you in pathology. So like what happens when it gets on your table?
So when we get it, we weigh it and we measure it and everything, and we just look at the outside of it and see what it looks like, and then we open it up to see what's inside, because we have to take samples of it, because under the microscope everything looks different. So it could be a benign cyst, it could be a malignant or a cancerous cyst. So we have to kind of describe what we see inside. And this particular one is a very interesting one. So when they opened it up, there was actually tissue in it that resembled this small, deformed human almost. It had hair. It had what appeared to be an arm, what appeared to be legs, and what appeared to be like a little penis growing between the legs. And when they cut through it, there was skin, fat, different organs, prostate gland, all of this weird stuff, right? So when they looked at it under the microscope, they actually couldn't believe that this thing that looked like a tiny penis was actually penile tissue with erectile tissue in it under the microscope. And she was diagnosed with something called a fetiform teratoma. And a teratoma arises, so when you think about this, like when you have your ovaries release eggs, and the point of those eggs is to make babies or humans, right? So those eggs have, the ovaries have tissues in them that are responsible for making a human. They're called germ cells. So they're these cells that like will eventually turn into skin and will eventually turn into hair and eventually turn into teeth and all these things. And when you have a tumor that arises from these cells, it creates, like, it has all the parts of a human, but it doesn't really ever look like a human. So most of the time when we get these, it'll be like you'll open it, it'll just be like a big ball of hair, and there might be a random tooth or something. This one, though, is called a fetiform teratoma because it almost was like way closer to looking like a human. The really important point to know here is that this does not require sex. It does not require a sperm. Like, this all just happens on its own, which is why it's never going to be a human. It's not like it's an abortion. It's not a miscarriage. It's just like a tumor made out of people cells.
So this could only happen because it arises from this very specific part of the body that has the cells that are where babies are formed.
Yes, you can get them in other parts of the body too, though. But for, like, let's just talk about this one and not get into details of, like, all the other things that could happen. But yes, this happens from ovarian tissue. This Dr. Vercal, he's like one of the first pathologists, you would say, back in 1863. He coined the term teratoma that comes from the Greek word teres, which means monster. So that's why I named this post Monster Inside Me. So the good news is that most of these teratomas are benign. So when you look at it and you look at it under the microscope and it all looks like normal hair cells, normal fat cells, things like that, then that means that it's benign. When you start seeing like those cells look weird under the microscope and they look like immature versions of all those tissues, they could rarely be cancer, but it's very rare that they turn into cancer.
So what's the difference between this and like fetus in fetu?
Fetus in fetu is a condition where a person is pregnant with twins, and when it's developing, one of the twins develops within the other twin.
Okay.
Like, you need a sperm and an egg to create that.
But could it look similar to this because the second twin is essentially not fully developing?
Well, no. I mean, because you wouldn't have that. You would only have that you would need another baby. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It just wouldn't be like this. Like, that does happen in fetus and fetu, that one of them can grow normally. It doesn't just have to be fetus and fetu. It could be other types of twin situations that one gets all of the energy and the other one doesn't form properly because it's not hooked up properly. Basically, it's not growing properly. But yeah, in this case, this could only happen arising from the ovary like this. Like, it has nothing to do with a pregnancy whatsoever or sex. Like, this could occur in a 12-year-old girl. Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Without ever having to have sex or anything. It's not this. That's the important difference, is that all of those other conditions, like acardiac twins and all these different things that could happen when there's conception.
Okay. All right. So our last one, which is called an uncanny accident, was submitted by a listener. So this woman's daughter was chasing her puppy next to their fire pit. She tripped, fell, and fell directly onto an aluminum can, which sliced her neck open.
Yeah, so she called her mom, kind of freaking out, and her mom was 20 minutes away at the time, and the fire department was only 10 minutes away. So they called 911, and the mom was like, "I'm coming home right now," and drove like a complete maniac to her daughter, which is understandable. And she actually beat the fire department from getting there. And when she arrived to the scene, she saw that her daughter had this giant incision on her neck, and like the fat and the muscle were cut. And it was just really gruesome. It was bleeding, and she was scared to death that her daughter cut a vital structure. And I think when the fire department and the paramedics showed up, they realized, like, okay, it's not as bad as it looks, kind of. And they were telling her, like, "Yo, lady, chill out. You're freaking out." And, they brought her to the hospital and everything. And while it looked like a really gruesome wound, she missed the jugular vein by millimeters. And the doctor said that she was really lucky, but they were able to just sew her back up and she was fine.
When you see that, do you think, all right, so this cut was on the side of her neck. Do you think if it was in the front, it would have been fatal? Or it just happened to be where it was?
Actually, if you get cut in the front of your neck, it's probably better because you can slice the trachea open, but that's something that could be repaired. So the major structures that you would die right away from are on the sides of your neck. And the carotid arteries, which are the really bad ones to cut, because if you cut those, forget it, you're going to bleed all over the place because arteries bleed worse because the arteries are part of the pump of the heart. So they're pumping the oxygenated blood up to your brain. They're directly off of the aorta too. So you're just getting this big rush of blood. So when they get cut, every single time your heart beats, it's like gush, gush, gush. Whereas the veins are bringing it back to your heart and the blood comes slower back to the heart. So if a vein gets cut, you have like much more time to get to the hospital and stuff because it's not coming out as fast. Like if she had somehow cut one of her carotid arteries, I mean, she wouldn't even have been able to make it to the hospital. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I mean, a good anatomic setup is that the carotid arteries are pretty deep in the neck. Like you kind of really got to get in there. But the jugular veins are fairly superficial. She was very close to them.
Yeah, talk about a total freak accident. Like you're just trying to have a nice time playing around with your dog and then fall in the can and then all of a sudden your neck's completely split open.
Yeah, I know. It is nuts.
But she's very lucky and she has kind of a badass scar on the neck on her neck for the rest of her life. So
yeah, she is. And this was submitted by a Gross Room member. Did you say that? One of our Mother Knows Death listeners and Gross Room members submitted this case about her daughter. So they're going to be listening and be very happy that they could smile over this terrible accident that happened.
Yeah, totally. And if you guys have a shocking story that you want to submit, you could email stories@motherknowsdeath.com. Give us as much info as you can, include pictures if you want. We love to read them.
All right, thanks. See you next time, guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Mother Knows Death. As a reminder, my training is as a pathologist assistant. I have a master's level education and specialize in anatomy and pathology education. I am not a doctor and I have not diagnosed or treated anyone, dead or alive, without the assistance of a licensed medical doctor. This show, my website, and social media accounts are designed to educate and inform people based on my experience working in pathology so they can make healthier decisions regarding their life and well-being. Always remember that science is changing every day and the opinions expressed in this episode are based on my knowledge of those subjects at the time of publication. If you are having a medical problem, have a medical question, or are having a medical emergency, please contact your physician or visit an urgent care center, emergency room, or hospital. Please rate, review, and subscribe to Mother Knows Death on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere you get podcasts. Thanks.